Hey guys, this is Mr. Tui. The plan, of course, has been to do Q&A, talk about the Brothers Karamazov. Um, my health has not permitted that, and my health is not really improving that well. So anyway, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to just make uh, some start and stop videos here. I'm sorry if they're a little disjointed. I'm doing the best I can because I have to stop for coughing and medication and things like that. I can't time a discussion very well because I'll spend sometimes several minutes being interrupted by coughing. So it's not really feasible right now to do Zoom that much. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm gonna post three things today, and it's a lot. And I know it's a lot of material, but I'm trying to catch up from the time I've missed because of illness. A couple of announcements. I was hoping you guys could have. It's the 20th. Today is the day this will be posted on the 20th. I was hoping I could see the first draft of your papers. I mean, technically, the due date for the first draft of your papers is already passed. But if just make sure I see them by the 29th, guys. That way I have time to at least look at them and we can get some revisions done. I know a lot of this has been done haphazardly, and I'm very sorry. I've been sick. The world is sick right now, I guess. But it's been pretty rough. But today the whole point is I'm gonna try to. I'll be starting and stopping this, but the idea is I want to get us caught up on the end of book 4, and then talk about the beginning of book 5, and then also talk about what we were going to talk about today, which was the first part of the conversation between Ivan and Alyosha, and that's going to be what we focus on for the whole this week. So there's a lot of things that are going on, right? So let's just kind of launch into them and catching up as easily as we can. So we know that the last time we saw, right, last time we spoke, we remember that the elder, Father Zosima, right, so the elder Z, right, that's the saintly elder, right, we know he's dying, and there was a huge character foil of him in the monastery, and that's referring to Father Farapont, right? And Father Farapont is, supposedly, he sees demons, he fasts excessively, right? He's kind of the image of what we would call the extreme ascetic. And the idea about holiness that is being put forward is, which is holiness? Is holiness based upon love of neighbor, right? Which some people think can be overly merciful. That would be Elder Zosima. Or is it, extreme piety, which can lead to impatience with neighbor? Oftentimes, when we think about the lives of the saints, they do these extreme things, particularly in the Orthodox tradition, where you have the fools for Christ, and you have saints that sit on top of poles for decades, or saints who don't eat anything but a mouthful of bread a day for years and things like that. This is kind of the thing that Farapont is being held in contrast to. And the idea, right, is that everything in Dostoevsky is told in the extremes, right? And so Farapont, right, is an extreme faster, someone who fasts all the time, and he lives as largely solitary, and some people want him to be his elder. They're assuming that he's otherworldly because of his seeming lack of normal physical whatever. He doesn't seem to have a good relationship with Zosima. He seems to maybe envy him or view Zosima as something that's less than. They have almost no contact whatsoever. He basically lives as a hermit within the monastery. There's no real brotherly love or contact between them. And one of the things, right, we also have Father Paisy, right? And Father Paisy, might be, he might be a new perhaps a new father for Alexei or Alyosha, because you have this, he's kind of like the next person down in the monastery, and now that Zosima is dying, and we have all of this kind of different stuff going on, and everything in Brothers K is always told in the extremes. We know that the night before, we may remember, before he went to go see his father, the thing he got this letter from Liz, who is the teenage daughter of Koplikov, and we'll just call her Madame Coke, right? And Madame Coke, right? She's an extraordinary character. She is flippant. She changes her mind on a dime. And Liz, who seemingly has had some kind of disease that makes it sometimes hard for her to walk. She's sometimes in a wheelchair. It's possible that she has a less severe polio, meaning, sometimes she can walk, sometimes she can't. But anyway, she's an interesting girl. She writes Alyosha this letter of love, and of course, Alyosha goes and sees her. And of course, she then says, "Oh no, I never really loved you. I was just playing games with you." And Alyosha cries, and he's again very, we're just recapping here. There's just something very extreme about the way Liz, right? And again, this is another important idea. Liz, in extremes, right? Like she writes Alyosha the letter, "I love you, I want to marry you." And then he goes and sees her, and it's like, "Oh, I was just playing with you, and I was laughing at you," etc. In the same book, right, we have, and so the extreme, right, is the fickleness of a teenager saying, "I love you, I want to be with you forever." "Oh, I was just playing with you, I'm a terrible, wicked girl," right? Once again, we have the different extremes that are being put. The extremes continue with the story when we have Alexei meeting with Ivan and Katerina. And as you know, Katerina is engaged to Dmitri. Katerina is engaged to Mitya, right? And she decides that in spite of the fact that Dmitri has betrayed her and shamed her name, that she wants to forgive him, and that even though she can never forgive him, that she will still never leave him. This is again the story told in extremes. And Ivan even says that he approves of this decision, in spite of the fact that Alyosha thinks that Ivan is in love with Katerina. And all of this is a very, very, very strange. All of this is a very, very strange situation. And what we see in this scene is, and I'm just going to read a little bit, because it's important to kind of talk about the nature of Katerina and how weird she is. Ivan says he approves of the decision, and she says, "In all these affairs, Alexei Fedorovich, in these affairs, the main thing now is honor and duty and something else. I don't know what, but something higher, even perhaps higher than duty itself. My heart tells me of this irresistible feeling, and it draws me irresistibly. But it can be said in 2 words. I've already made up my mind. Even if he marries that creature," so when she's saying that, she's referring to Brushenka, "whom I can never, never forgive, I will still not leave him. From now on, I will never, never leave him." She spoke with a sort of strain and a sort of pale, forced ecstasy. "I do not mean that I shall drag myself after him, trying to throw myself in front of his eyes every minute, tormenting him. Oh no, I shall go to another town, anywhere you like, but I will watch him all my life, untiringly. And when he becomes unhappy with that woman, and he certainly will, and very soon, then let him come to me, and he will find a friend, a sister, only a sister, of course, and that will be so forever. But he will finally be convinced that this sister really is his loving sister who has sacrificed her whole life for him. I will do it. I will insist that he finally know me and tell me everything without being ashamed," she exclaimed in a frenzy. "I will be his God to whom he shall pray. That at least he owes me for his betrayal, and for what I suffered yesterday because of him. And let him see throughout his whole life that all my life I will be faithful to him and to the word I once gave, despite the fact that he was faithless and betrayed me. I shall become simply the means of his happiness, or how shall I say, the instrument, the mechanism of his happiness, and that for my whole life, so that he may see it now on all his life. That is the whole of my decision. Ivan approves me of the highest degree. It says she was breathless, right? And this is what Ivan adds. I only expressed my thought, he said, and any other woman, all that would have come out in a broken and forced way, but not so in you. Another woman would be wrong, but you are right. I do not know what is behind it, but I see that you are sincere in the highest degree, and therefore you are right. So Ivan is willing to let her go ahead with this plan, in spite of the fact that Alyosha thinks Ivan is in love with her. And he is, to an extent. And so what is this about, right? This whole thing about what is Katerina doing? And so we need to see that there's a parallel between Katerina and Fairmont. And the parallel is this, right? They both seem to like to suffer, and they want to be seen as noble. They are proud, and they want to be the holy ones who the sinners look up to in their piety, right? That's the general idea. And also, Katerina also has something in common with Madame Koklikov, right? And what do they have in common, right? Remember that Madame Koklikov said to Zosima, I want to be a saint. I just want people to be grateful for my sanctity, right? I would be happy to be a saint if only people would just recognize how wonderful and how holy I am. And the thing is that what Alexei tries to tell them from his simplicity is this is all wrong. You should love Ivan. Ivan loves you. Why would you? This is just kind of all wrong. And basically, this is and then and she's like, I must know what this what is going on here. And this is what he says. I don't know myself. I have suddenly had a sort of illumination. I know I'm not putting it well, but I'll still say everything. My illumination is that perhaps you do not love my brother Dmitri at all from the very beginning, and Dmitri perhaps does not love you either from the very beginning, but only honors you. I really don't know how I dare say all this now, but someone has to speak the truth, because no one here wants to speak the truth. What truth? Cried Katerina, and something hysterical rang in her voice. This truth. Call Dmitri now. I'll go and find him, and let him come here and take you by the hand, and then take my brother Ivan by the hand, and let him unite your hands, for you are tormenting Ivan only because you love him, and you are tormenting him because you love Dmitri from strain, not in truth, because you've convinced yourself of it. And she calls Alyosha a holy little fool. She's very angry. And Ivan gives what is an interesting response. He says, you are mistaken, my good Alyosha, he said with an expression of face that Alyosha had never seen before. He sees the mask slip, right? And this is what Ivan says. Like, he sees Ivan in very authentic emotion, which he hasn't seen before. You are mistaken, my good Alyosha. Katerina has never loved me. She knew all along that I loved her, though I never said a word to her about my love. She knew, but she did not love me. Nor have I been her friend, not even once, not even for one day. The proud woman did not need my friendship. She kept me near her for constant revenge. She took revenge on me, and was revenged through me for all the insults she endured continually and every moment throughout all this time from Dmitri. Insults that started with their very first meeting. Because their very first meeting, too, remained in her heart as an insult. That is what her heart is like. And all I did all the time was listen to her love for him. I am leaving now, but know, Katerina Ivanovna, that you indeed love only him. And the more he insults you, the more you love him. That is your strain. You precisely love him as he is. You love him insulting you. If he reformed, you would drop him at once and stop loving him altogether. But you need him to continually contemplate your high deed of faithfulness, and to reproach him for his unfaithfulness.
and it all comes from your pride. Oh, there is much humility and humiliation in it, but it all comes from pride. I am too young and loved you too much. I know I shouldn't be telling you this, that it would be more dignified on my part to simply walk out of here. It would not be so insulting to you. But I am going far away and shall never come back. It is forever. I do not want to sit next to a strain. However, I cannot even speak any more. I've said everything. Farewell, Katerina. You must not be angry with me, because I am punished 100 times more than you, punished already by this alone, that I shall never see you again. Farewell. I do not want your hand. You've been tormenting me so consciously that I am unable to forgive you at the moment. Later I shall forgive you, but no hand now. He added with a crooked smile, incidentally proving quite unexpectedly that he too could learn Schiller by heart. I'm sorry. He adds, "Den Dank dam begel ich nicht." He quotes the poetry, and so basically, Ivan, right? Ivan sees that Aloysia has seen his love for Katerina, uh, and he knows that Alyosha's right, but he also knows that there's something about Katerina that she loves herself. That even though loving Dmitri is humiliating, she loves the humiliation because of how it elevates her somehow. And it's this idea of false sanctity, right? The idea that we are kind of being put this idea of false sanctity, right? And this is being kind of put forward with people like Ferapont, with Madame K, and with Katerina to a certain extent. And that's the idea that holiness and sacrifice from pride and from self-glorification, right? And that's the thing, right? And Ivan is somewhat guilty of this too, because in this moment he's like, "Oh, I'm suffering so much," but he's also been avenging himself on Katerina. He was willing to encourage her to live off out of this strain, out of this wound, uh, this strain, this wound, in order that she might have this elevated view of herself that she wants. And a lot of people, the way they live in such a way, as Dostoevsky points out, that they're not really living holiness if the way that they're living is so that they can live with themselves, that they can have an elevated opinion of themselves. And that is being put in contrast with both Alyosha and Zosima, who basically their version of holiness is always not about being private, not about asceticism, not about fasting, but is about this idea of being honest and being good to one another, right? It's very simple. It's about sacrifice for the other, not for being loved, not for the other person being grateful, not for, because when Katerina even says, "I will be his God," right? And that's one of those clear kind of getaways. And Ivan, who does find Katerina attractive because of her intelligence, her pride, her fierceness, right? The fact that she is still so helplessly in love with Dmitri, he's willing to punish her by letting her go along with her plan, just because there's a certain extent in which he resents her. And again, this is such a, now there's this weird semi-love triangle now between Katerina, Dmitri, and Ivan. And as if that love triangle between Dmitri and Grushenka and Katerina wasn't weird enough, or if the love triangle between, the father, Fyodor, Dmitri, and Grushenka wasn't weird enough. So now we have a tale of like 3 love triangles, and it's just weird. It's just weird. But the whole idea is that you'll notice that why does Dmitri want to be with Grushenka? Well, because on one hand, because he's just irresistibly attracted to her, but also because, right, Mitya thinks of himself as dirt. And Grushenka, who's a loose woman, right, he also kind of thinks of her as dirt. So she thinks dirt belongs together, right? He's, because of his lowered opinion of himself, he thinks he should be with Grushenka. Fyodor wants to be with Grushenka just because he's Fyodor, right? I mean, his desire is obvious. Katerina, right? She wants to be with Dmitri because she thinks of Dmitri as dirt as well, because she wants to be elevated, right? And even if she goes and marries Grushenka, she would still love him as a sister and a caretaker and as the woman who truly loves him, because she wants to continue this elevated opinion of herself. And you have this just ongoing similarity of this idea in Dostoevsky that he just refers to as strain. Strain. And strain in Dostoevsky, it's best just kind of, it's this kind of this wound you can't stop picking. And you love it, right? You love the wound. You love the pride and the self-pity and everything else that comes out of it. And basically what happens is this theme of strain, it continues throughout this chapter, throughout this book, because what you know is that Katerina, right, as if this situation couldn't get any more, she sends Alyosha on another errand, and the errand that he sends him to is basically to go to this captain whom Dmitri humiliated and badly beat in public. So I'm gonna, if we go to the list of characters, I just want to make sure I get the name exactly right, because it's one of those names that if you say it wrong, it can go really, really bad. Let's see. The name, I believe it's Snigurov. I don't want to get. He's often just referred to as the captain, but I just want to be very, very careful that I don't. Snegurov, Nikolai Ilyich Snegurov. All right. So now we have this again, extremely hard to spell, but and in some English translations it's got the Y, sometimes it doesn't. So Captain Snegurov, right? He has a situation where he has a couple of family members who he takes care of that are invalids, right? Some sick children, a sick wife. And now he's a semi-invalid as well, because he was so badly beaten by Dmitri. Dmitri felt insulted by him, and he literally grabbed and dragged Captain Snegurov by his beard and humiliated him. And he and his family are in very dire straits. And Katerina wants Alyosha to deliver the sum of 200 rubles, which is still significant, right? Like, it's still a very significant amount of money. We'll think it's probably at least maybe about $2,000, at least. Probably even more than that. I'd say, 200 rubles, yeah, at least $2,000 now. And it's to help their situation out. And the thing is, right, is that money, that 200 rubles that Alyosha has been sent to give to Snegurov, because Dmitri behaved badly and beat him and dragged him by the beard and humiliated Snegurov in front of his son Alusha. He's the boy who bit Alyosha, right? And that's why, because he was a Karamazov. If he takes this money, everything can be better for the family, right? The kid, the wife, Snegurov, they can go to school, they can get the medicine they need. It can probably turn their whole situation around. And what happens in that scene? And again, it's one of those really puzzling scenes. And the puzzling scene that happens is that, what does Snegurov do with the 200 rubles? He literally throws them back. He crumples them and throws them back at Alyosha. And again, it's this idea of strain, right? For pride, right? Snegurov cannot accept the generosity from a Karamazov, right? He feels that if he takes this money, he's selling out his honor. He's like, what about my son who watched his father get badly beaten? Right? What does it say if I, even if this money could fix all my family's problems, what about my pride? What about my honor to accept, and to be allowed to be treated like a dog like this? And so again, this concept of strain, right? That people, for the sake of their own pride and their own self-image, their inflated sense of self-image rather than humility, that really is this consistent cause of extraordinarily dumb acts, right? This strain makes the father act a buffoon, right? It's this combination of shame and pride that Dostoevsky, calls strain. It makes Ivan unable to be vulnerable. It makes Dmitri go for a woman he knows is faithless. It makes Katerina want to sacrifice her happiness for her own pride. It makes Ivan willing to, instead of pursuing, to torture or to let Katerina torture herself, and on and on and on, and finally Captain Sniggerov, who'd be willing to sacrifice, his whole family to this pride of his, and when we think about other people being involved, the sick wife, sick children, your own difficulty in the situation, you're thinking, how in the world can you live for this pride, for this strain? And that confuses people today, because most people would say, hey, I'll take a humiliation if it'll solve all my problems. I mean, there are a lot of things I'd be willing to do for $2,000, and whether I've been publicly shamed or not. That was a joke, not a very funny one. Sorry. The point is that what we should understand is there's something here about the Russian spirit that we should understand. And the Russian spirit, right? We should remember that when Napoleon, as in Bonaparte, invaded Russia and he got all the way to Moscow, the people of Russia, instead of surrendering to Emperor Napoleon and living, they actually basically burned Moscow to the ground. They took what food they could and they destroyed what food they couldn't take and run with, and basically burned Moscow to the ground. And they did that. They would rather starve to death than give Russia to Napoleon. They thought of him as the Antichrist. And that's the Russian spirit, that they would rather die than submit to the rule of the French emperor. And that's ultimately what broke Napoleon's army, is not, what broke that, because over 400,000 men went to Russia and something like 20,000 returned. And the point of that, the reason why that was able to happen, is because the Russians were willing to commit large mass suicide in Moscow in order to keep the army from being able to feed and shelter itself in the winter. Because when people talk about how dumb the French were for attacking Russia in winter, what they did not estimate that the Russian people would be willing to sacrifice themselves en masse to prevent the reign of Napoleon. And in the same way, right, there's this Russian spirit of strain, of this pride, of this sense of self. Like, I cannot give up my sense of self no matter what. And this is, part of the fact that they, have been a nation that has been so oppressed for so long, enduring such horrific suffering. And in that horrific suffering, it also gave them a certain strength and a certain spirit. And all of that, right? All of the things that we're looking at, right? What we see in book 4 about all these different strains, right? Whether it be the strain of Ferapont, the strain of the boy who just kept attacking him and kept expecting, because the thing is, right, this kid could have run away from Alyosha at any time. Remember, right, the biting, he even bit Alyosha's finger to the bone, and he kept staying. He didn't kick him and run away, throw a rock at him and run away. He kept expecting a beating, right? But he felt the need to stand up for his father, to stand up for the spirit, in spite of the fact that the other boys were throwing rocks at him. He kept basically taking it. You have, at the Koklukos, you have Lies, who, by the way, really does love Alyosha, but humiliates herself and him by saying, no, I really don't love you. And then there's the strain with Ivan and Katerina. And then there's the strain with the captain Sniggerov. And in every single instance, right, no one is able to give up their pride. No one is able to give up their pride and be willing to humble themselves enough to just let themselves be happy and let themselves be ruled by some of their actual desires. And that's the thing, like why everyone in this book, other than Alyosha, the hero, seems to be utterly interested in getting in their own way and unable to be able to be happy. Um, and so therefore that kind of and this theme of strain is going to continue throughout the text. So that really gets us caught up on book 4, and I'm gonna and now I will stop this, and then I'm going to talk about chapters 1 and 2